The Pittsburgh Steelers officially sign Russell Wilson. We talk about why it could be the perfect move for the Steelers at the quarterback position, and so much more coming up next on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're a daily NFL podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostraker. I'm one of the many NFL experts here on our network, and I'm the host of Locked On Ravens. And thank you for tuning in today to Locked On NFL, making us your first listen each and every day on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form, wherever you get your shows, so you can subscribe in both video form and audio form. And for this show, it's going to be a really interesting one because Russell Wilson, really, this is essentially breaking news, just signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a lot to get into here today. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Some behind the scenes here on Locked On NFL. I had recorded this. We're recording this about, midnight because that's when this Russell Wilson news dropped. I had already recorded a Russell Wilson-centric show with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. We did that in the afternoon. And obviously we get the Russell Wilson news late at night. So we're getting the pure first reaction from Chris Carter in the first segment about Russell Wilson. We recorded it already. We did it again for the updated version. I've already recorded this intro. I'm doing it again. Some behind the scenes stuff. But you know what? In this industry, that's how it works sometimes, and it's a grind. I absolutely love it. So we're going to be talking with Chris in the first part of the show about Russell Wilson. Then we'll move on to the second part of the show. Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars will join us to talk about the Mac Jones trade. He goes from the Patriots to Jacksonville. Then finally, we'll talk with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns. Jerry Jeudy gets traded from the Broncos to the Browns in the final part of the show. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers officially sign Russell Wilson. It's a one-year deal. Here to talk about that with me is Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers. For those that don't know, Chris and I actually recorded a segment on the potential of Russell Wilson going to Pittsburgh about, what is it now, Chris, 6 hours ago?
Yep.
And we get the notification about 11:30, 11:45 at night that Russell Wilson officially makes the move over to Pittsburgh. So we're talking about this, Chris and I, for the second time. And Chris, now that we know the finality of the whole situation, what was your first reaction? I'm sure there were a whirlwind of emotions going on through your head with it.
My first reaction was, Russell, you couldn't have posted that like tomorrow at noon or something, like a normal time where someone hasn't already recorded 3 shows on different networks about this already and that are going up right at midnight so that you can. Oh, I so hate this. But at the same time, breaking it down, it makes a lot of sense. And as you and I talked about on the pre-recorded show, that means nothing now because of this signing. Logically, there was very few things that you could say, why would this not work for either side? Russell Wilson, as a quarterback, wants to go to a place that gives him the best chance to win and also gives him the best chance to start. You look at the options that he had available to him, the teams that were looking at him, the Raiders, the Giants, the Steelers. The Raiders, sure, he'd definitely start there, but how close are they to being a competitive team, even with the quarterback? The Giants, they got a lot of problems right now, and they just lost their arguably their best weapon in Saquon Barkley. The Steelers are the team that they have a developing offensive line. They've got talent on offense for him to get the ball to. They've got a defense that ranks in the top 10. They were 6th in scoring last year. It makes the most sense for Russell Wilson to go to, and they have one of the best head coaches in the NFL in Mike Tomlin to lead the way. It made the most sense for Russell Wilson. And for the Steelers, they wanted someone that, A, wouldn't cost them a draft pick to get, which he didn't, wouldn't take up any of their cap space, which he didn't. According to Adam Schefter, it looks like it's just a $1 million deal because of what the Broncos are paying him. It was the simplest decision that it just added up so much right there. The only thing that could get in the way was if during the Steelers meeting that they felt that Russell Wilson was that divisive figure that some people have tried to paint him being in his time with the Seattle Seahawks, with the Denver Broncos. And if that was the case, the Steelers would have said, we'll hold off. We'll rock with Kenny Pickett and someone else. Now you've gone and got Russell Wilson. Now Russell Wilson comes in. You're presuming he's going to be the starting quarterback going into this season. Now, I will say this. For Kenny Pickett, this is a chance for you to take on this challenge, to go into this season and say, hey, you know what? That guy's a 9-time Pro Bowler. He's a Super Bowl champion. If I can prove that I can hang with that guy, then I can prove that I belong in the NFL. And I know some people are going to say Russell Wilson's washed. And listen, he's nowhere near what he used to be for the Seattle Seahawks in his prime. But this guy had 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions last year. In the red zone, he had 20 touchdowns to 1 interception. His deep passing was also pretty efficient. I think 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. They're not going to ask Russell Wilson to be a superhero. They're not going to ask him to be the magic man that sometimes he was for Seattle in some crazy games. They're going to say, hey, Russ, this is a team with a developing offensive line that wants to run the football. In the last 10 weeks of the season last year, the Steelers were the number 2 rushing offense in the NFL during those last 10 games. And the only team that was ahead of them was the Baltimore Ravens. If they can rekindle that with an improved offensive line, I'm pretty sure they're investing in it in free agency and the draft. And you have the weapons developing, and now a better offensive coordinator and a quarterback who's probably going to perform better. You could put Russell Wilson in a very good situation to play off a play action, which he has very impressive numbers throwing in play action this past season. You could put him in an advantageous situation where you're not asking him to carry your team the way that some franchise quarterbacks carry their teams. You're still putting the emphasis on the defense, on the offensive line, on the run game, and then saying, hey, Russ, on these parts where we need a quarterback just to hit the open man, just to do the basics here, that's where you come in. And if Russell Wilson can do that, it's a great fit. But the big question is, does Russell Wilson understand that? I feel like Mike Tomlin, one of his biggest, maybe his best skill, is communicating to his players what his expectations are. And if that communication was gotten across to Russell Wilson and he heard it and he internalized it and he appreciates it, that shouldn't be a problem. The question will be, will he fit with Arthur Smith's offense? Will they come together? And how will this offense look when we see them line up in September?
Yeah, it almost feels like the perfect quarterback move for Pittsburgh for all those reasons you just listed out there, Chris. Didn't cost them a draft pick. Is going to cost them a lot of money and still gives them an avenue to go and improve their team in a bunch of other different ways. But how much of an upgrade is it from a Kenny Pickett? How much does Russell Wilson elevate the Steelers, knowing that, again, presuming he's going to be your starter in 2024, the fact that he now comes in as a veteran with championship experience, what does it mean for the Pittsburgh offense?
For me, I think the biggest thing that it gives the Steelers is that Russell Wilson can hit the basic throws. And that's what they were asking Kenny Pickett to do. Like, if you go back through, I'm a person who I still say Kenny Pickett can fix some of the problems, because the problems that Kenny Pickett was having wasn't complex things. It was getting the basics things done. And maybe, and I've said, like, maybe that was a part of just the dysfunction that was in the offense last season that kind of got in the way. But Russell Wilson isn't going to have that problem. There were so many games where if Kenny Pickett just hit the open man or Deontay Johnson on a wide open slant, they beat the Cleveland Browns in their away game that year. If he hits the open slant, they're in the Texans game. They're in the Niners games that they lost early in the season. And those are the 2 games. Actually, those are 2 of the games that Kenny Pickett lost that he started last year. The Steelers lost most of their games when Mitch Trubisky had to come in. I look at that and think, if Russell Wilson can do those things, do those basics, hit the open man, understand the basic concepts, and just not lose the game for them, this team does well. I mean, you go back and you look at over the past 4 seasons. 3 seasons. We'll go that last 3 seasons, because 2020 was kind of a weird year with Ben Roethlisberger coming back from injury and being good for like half a season. But you look back over the last 3 years, how many times have the Steelers won a game because they held an opponent to 20 points or less? That's basically been their formula for winning. It is the offense does just enough to get them over the hump, while the defense carries the way. If Russell Wilson can just meet that bar of saying, "Hey, get this team to 24 points, get them to that level consistently," this team has a good chance to win football games. That's the fit that Russell Wilson has to have. He has to be able to work with play action. He has to hit the open man, and he does need to get the ball to the Steelers playmakers. And if he plays within the scheme the Steelers are drawing up, I think this could be a good fit for the Steelers. The question will be, will he do that, and how will that how will that work with what the Steelers are doing? They also have to hit in the draft and free agency in several positions. They need to fix center. They need to get another tackle to pair with Broderick Jones. They need another cornerback that's going to start across from Joey Porter Jr. and a slot corner. They probably need another safety. They probably need another linebacker. Those are a lot of needs to address. If they address those things, I think Russell Wilson could be in an advantageous situation. The new front office, they've been last year, they did very well in free agency and the draft. If they repeat it this year, I think Russell Wilson, he might find himself in a spot that he prefers to what he was dealing with in Denver.
And how do you think this impacts Pittsburgh in terms of how you view them in the AFC North now? Really tough division. We know it's going to be competitive for a really long time here. Pittsburgh obviously was a team that made the playoffs last year. It's not like they're coming off a 5-win season or something like that.
Yeah.
They're upgrading and adding a quarterback with that experience. But in the AFC North, I think all four teams are going to be competing for playoff spots again.
I agreed. I think that's where it's kind of at. Like all four teams kind of words down the stretch. If the Bengals weren't as banged up, maybe they are the fourth playoff team. But I look at what Russell Wilson brings. If Russell Wilson just doesn't commit the crazy turnovers that like Deshaun Watson did for the Browns when he was healthy, maybe that gives the Steelers enough of an edge because they have been able to, and now we officially got it. He's signing for the veteran minimum. Crazy. But if Russell Wilson's able to do that with the Steelers and execute the basics without making those mistakes, while also making some of the plays that a veteran quarterback's supposed to make, making some of the reads that come with his experience in the NFL, I think that gives the Steelers a bit of an edge. I mean, you think about it, Kevin. They have been in the AFC North as a frustrating team for the division leaders to face. I mean, the Ravens won the division this past year. They have problems with the Steelers. They've lost 7 of the last 8 times to the Steelers. And yes, injuries are a part of that, and also resting guys at the end of the season. But the Steelers and the Ravens, when they've gone at each other lately, the Steelers have found ways to win, even when Lamar Jackson does play. I think that with the Bengals, you see how they've gone back and forth. The Browns, they've gone back and forth. And that's been without. I mean, the last time I think the Steelers had above the bar quarterback play for an entire season was 2018. You think about that. Like 2020, there was a time, I think like half of the season Ben was there, and then the second half he wasn't. 2021 was old Ben. 2022 was Trubisky and rookie Pickett. 2023 was Pickett, Trubisky, and Rudolph. 2019, if you go back even further from that, that was Mason Rudolph's first year with Devlin Duck Hodges. It's been since 2018 that the Steelers have had a quarterback playing at what you expect to be a veteran, good, upper half of the league type of quarterback play consistently for an entire season. If Russell Wilson just gives you that, just top 16 quarterback play, I think it does a lot for this team.
Major shout out to Chris for giving me 2 segments of his time, one in the afternoon and one in the wee hours of the night, or I guess very, very early in the morning, technically. You can follow along with Chris on the Locked On Steelers podcast and right here on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars will join us to talk about Mac Jones going to the Jaguars. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On NFL. First, this show is sponsored by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Some superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 102 million parts, your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need, the prices you want, to see you to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Also, items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back with second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We're now going to dive into Mac Jones. Somewhat of a surprising deal as Mac Jones got traded from the Patriots to the Jaguars in exchange for what's looking to be a 6th-round pick. We're going to talk with Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars about if it means anything for Trevor Lawrence and what Jones brings to the Jaguars. A lot more coming up now with Tony Wiggins. The Jacksonville Jaguars made headlines on Sunday as they acquired former New England Patriots quarterback Mac Jones from the Patriots, and it's a big deal for the Jaguars. Now, obviously, there's Trevor Lawrence in place in Jacksonville, but Mac Jones slots in as the backup. Here to talk about the acquisition of Jones is Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars. And Wig, I feel like with this move, there are a lot of people talking about, well, why would the Jaguars make this move? Why would they go out and go get a Mac Jones? What were your initial reactions when this move first dropped and the reports came out?
A little bit of validation, and that validation only stems from the fact that I have told Jaguar fans for a long time that those operations in the building don't work the way your mind works, meaning they're always evaluating everything, even the things that you don't think need to be evaluated. And what they're evaluating or what their priorities are don't always line up with what becomes available. So you have to make sure that you're always prepared and you're always ready. The backup quarterback situation, I didn't think it was a huge priority because the Jaguars didn't make it seem like it was a huge priority last year because they just re-signed CJ Beathard. And guess what he did? When he had a chance to play, he played well. So now you're wondering what changed their mind. I'm of the thought that what changed their mind was they had to make sure that they had a backup who could play if Trevor Lawrence got hurt again like he did last year and be able to win enough games to keep everybody from losing the job. That's the way I'm coming across because at the end of the day, Mac is a rookie in the same class as Trevor Lawrence, and I don't think Mac had his fifth-year option picked up. So that means he's a free agent after this year. So you got a guy that's a one-year rental because he only has 1 year left on his contract, a contract that I from what I understand, New England's paying some of the money. But the thing is if he has resigned himself to just being a backup in his hometown, cool. In a way, because now you got a backup that never wants to be a starter, and that's the problem, if you ask me from a macro perspective. But I also say then that means if you're okay with that, then you have a backup now forever, right? Who has had starts in the league, he know if you put everything around him, he ain't bad, he ain't terrible, because you're not going to get, I tell people all the time, you're not going to go out and get Tom Brady in free that as your backup. So right. You have to be able to make that decision. But the problem is this for me, you gave up a 6th-round pick in a draft that is really loaded at positions where the Jaguars need help. The 6th-round pick, you might not get a guy there, but you take that 6th and that 5th and put it with something else, you're able to move up a little bit and get into a real hot spot of this draft, which is the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round. So a little bit of like, I wonder why, but I'm not really upset. To all of it just has to play itself out and you hope what it isn't is cover your what, because we have to try to win this year.
Yeah, and it wasn't like there wasn't no interest in Jones. Reportedly, there were about 4 or so teams interested. The Jaguars obviously win the sweepstakes. And if you're Trevor Lawrence, I've seen the conversation around social media, Wig, where it's, what does this mean for Trevor? What does it mean for Trevor? Obviously, Trevor's the guy at quarterback, right? There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if you're Trevor, what are you thinking about Jacksonville going out there and getting a backup when you mentioned it? CJ Beathard did play pretty well when he was given the opportunity last year.
Well, it would signal to me that they mean that they're going to create, it's not really competition, but that they're going to raise the floor of every room, which means this guy was a 1st-round pick just a few years back. So we're raising the floor up every room. But if I'm Trevor Lawrence, that doesn't impress me because I don't necessarily want the competition behind me increased. Because they're right now in a situation where they got to make a decision on his 5th-year offer. So now it's too late. And see, this is what bad teams do. They're always chasing everything, right? If I'm Trevor Lawrence, I'm like, don't worry about the competition behind me. You need to worry about the competition behind my wide receivers and my offensive line. You need to worry about the competition behind those defensive linemen on the interior. And you need to worry about the competition at corner. So for me, it's like, it's not a bad thing. Like if you're in a hospital, it's not a bad thing to tell the doc, hey, man, look, I got a hangnail. Can you get that ingrown toenail out? Well, sure. But then it's kind of weird if you tell them that while your femur's fractured in half. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's not really like the biggest deal on earth right now. But that's the confusion today. The confusion is it's not a bad move. But there are so many other moves that you need to make that you're not making. We don't care. And we're just wondering where your mind is. And that's why this is the opportunity to let fans know it's kind of a good thing, because eval always has to be eval and constantly improving. And this is a pro personnel move. This is not the director of college scouting. This is a pro personnel move. This is the other side of the draft that we never pay attention to. The fact is that they made it a priority and they got it done, as opposed to why can't they get these other things done?
Right. And I think it's a big deal because with Jacksonville, this is a really important offseason for them, especially considering how the AFC South is stacking up for next year. Jacksonville obviously included in that, I think, contender conversation to win the division. But in your eyes, Wig, just how important is this offseason for Jacksonville this year, especially free agency coming up here today?
It's huge. It's huge for a number of reasons. One of the biggest reasons that it's big is because they've all but admitted that last offseason, where they just said, we're standing pat, we're going to run everything back, and we're a draft and develop team. We're no longer going to go chasing free agents. And it backfired in their face because they ran everything back and they ended up with the exact same record that they had the year before, and it was a disappointment. The bigger disappointment is this. The other three teams in this division, they all had rookie quarterbacks. So the advantage that you thought you had when you got Trevor Lawrence, and in Trevor Lawrence's second year, you won the division. It seems like there was this expectation that now that means we're going to keep rolling and that's what we're going to do. Well, it lasted 1 year. And now these other teams are saying, well, wait. Our guy is just as young or younger than your guys. You don't have that advantage anymore. So now you can't rely on that. You can't rely on that for the enthusiasm. You can't rely on that for the optimism. You can't rely on that for the momentum that it may or may not create. Now you really have to get back to business, and you got to get back to work, and you have to figure out a way. And the only way to figure out that way in order to get things right is to do everything fundamentally correct, in which that's what they failed at for so long. It's about blocking, about tackling. It's about being physical. And unfortunately, the GM and the coach admitted this offseason so far that they lack physicality and the size and the strength to be able to compete in the trenches. The disappointing part about that is this. They're the ones that built the team.
We're going to see if Mac Jones pans out over there in Jacksonville. Obviously, back up to Trevor Lawrence at this point. For more on Tony, check him out over the Locked On Jaguars podcast and right here on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still a lot to get to on this episode of Locked On NFL. Rounding up the show, we'll talk with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns about Cleveland's acquisition of Jerry Jeudy from the Broncos. Stay tuned. Plenty to get to on Locked On NFL. First, this show is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or the 1 seed, it's time to go dance on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. This is FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet college hoops until they cut down the nets. We are back with Locked On NFL here on Monday. Kevin Ostreicher still here talking with you. Thanks so much for tuning into Locked On NFL today and making this show your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form wherever you get your shows. We have you covered with 5 days a week of NFL coverage Monday through Friday. And we're going to be talking now with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns about Jerry Jeudy. Cleveland acquires Jeudy from the Broncos for a 5th-round pick and a 6th-round pick. So let's talk with Jeff now about what the move means for Cleveland and more. The Cleveland Browns add a wide receiver, trading for Jerry Jeudy from the Denver Broncos, a 5th and a 6th-round pick going back to Denver in the deal. Here to talk about that with me, Jeff Lloyd, the host of Locked On Browns. And for those who don't listen to Locked On Browns, Jeff was all over this a couple of days before it happened, so just another reason why I should be listening to all of the shows on the network, including Locked On Browns. Jeff, it felt like a fit for the Browns and Jerry Jeudy. Denver's in sell mode. The Browns clearly trying to upgrade that receiving core that had a couple of questions, but now one of those seemingly answered in Jerry Jeudy. How do you like the move in general based off of Jeudy coming in and what Cleveland gave up?
Well, the move for me, and this I started floating this out 2 years ago, because when Denver, before the Russell Wilson deal, it looked like they had no direction of what they were doing with their passing game, and obviously various other things. Browns had interest, and then made a phone call to Denver. Obviously, this year around the trade deadline, they were trying to get him out then. Denver, mistakenly thought that they possibly had an opportunity to, maybe make the playoffs, which was probably a bad move, and you saw how everything obviously fell apart for them. But this is something that Andrew Berry and the Browns have always looked for. Look, okay, player that's maybe struggled, not lived up to his expectations. I can swoop in and get a player that once was a top 15 draft choice, and I can get him for crumbs. Browns also were looking at this wide receiver class, and this wide receiver class is really, really good, and it is, and it's really, really deep. But you could see 10 names go by the time the Browns pick 54. You can't rely on it. And the other thing is the Browns have not done much developing of any wide receiver they've drafted during the Andrew Berry regime. So you know what? Hey, analytics, smart people, what do you do? So we know everything's not working. What is not working? All right, so let's stop doing it that way and let's start doing it different ways. So 2 years ago, you make a trade for Amari Cooper. Last year, you make a trade for Elijah Moore. This year, you make a trade for Jerry Jeudy. You got 3 players that are all going to be hungry. Amari Cooper's on a contract year. Elijah Moore's on a contract year. Jerry Jeudy's on a contract year. One of the things that fascinates me the most about this trio is they could all win from the slot. They could all win from the outside. These guys are all proven, have put up proven production in their time in the NFL. You can do a variety of things with them. Between players who have had 40-yard receptions over the last 2 years, top 5 list. On that list is Amari Cooper. Also on that list is Jerry Jeudy. The Browns, you saw how much the offense looked good, improved when they were able to get the vertical game going with Joe Flacco. So guess what? Let's find somebody else that can do that. So obviously Amari Cooper has success with that. Jerry Jeudy has success with that. Browns are, thinking here, and look, the wide receiver free agent, that's never going to be a thing. Wide receiver free agency is never going to happen. If you're good enough, your team is going to pay you. You're going to get tagged. Then you got to trade, obviously, big assets to get, one of those guys. Maybe it's T. Higgins. Maybe it's a Michael Pittman. I don't think the Browns would ever trade the assets for it. I don't think, the Browns would do it that way. They like swooping in and getting somebody. And, that's what they got here with Jerry Jeudy. And, it's been a tough 2 years for Jerry Jeudy, the last 2 years with Russell Wilson. I don't want to hear, Russell Wilson was playing better last year. No, the standard is Russell Wilson. Was he playing like Russell Wilson? No, he was not. So therefore, he was not playing well. Playing well is what you say about a backup quarterback who comes in and has to finish the season as a starter. Russell Wilson was not playing well. He was not playing like Russell Wilson. So it was a tough spot for Jeudy. Is there drops at times? Yes. Does he run an incorrect route every now and then? Yes. But contract year, motivated, this is certainly a move for a 5th and a 6th. And the Cleveland Browns are a good roster right now. And a lot of guys that are drafted in the 5th and 6th round not only might not make the Browns, they probably would be cut sometime in August.
Right. I think it was a solid move, and especially with the cost, didn't cost you much of anything if you're Cleveland to go out there and get a guy like Jerry Jeudy. But Jeff, what are your expectations? You talked about Deshaun Watson. What are your expectations for him next year? Again, as you talked about, we don't really know too much about the Deshaun Watson in Cleveland era because there hasn't been a lot of it over the 2 years he's been there. So expectations for him and expectations for the offense with Jeudy in the fold, and also getting key guys back like a Nick Chubb.
See, and this is the biggest thing, because I think a lot of people, because Deshaun got hurt once, then got hurt a second time, didn't finish the season. A lot of people think Deshaun Watson wasn't playing well. Was he playing on the level of Patrick Mahomes? Was he playing on the level of Josh Allen? No, but let's keep in mind, those are the only 2 people on this earth that play on that level. Lamar Jackson's got his whole different ball game on. He's got his whole other tier where Lamar exists. But he was playing well, and you go to the obviously finality of his season in Baltimore, 14 for 14. Sorry, Kevin. Second half, obviously leading his team back to a big victory. And everybody is under this fascination, like the Cleveland Browns wouldn't have made the playoffs if it had been Deshaun Watson. It was always about the final 5-6 weeks for the Browns. It was simple. It was easy. It was easy games. We were all waiting to get to that point. The Browns would have made the playoffs with Deshaun Watson. Yes, Joe Flacco played well, but Deshaun Watson easily could have played just as well. Joe turned the ball over a ton. He was at an alarming turnover rate. That's something that Deshaun was not doing. I think, I think it's going to work. The question obviously is going to be, and they were going to do this last year. They were going to be a team that was going to start throwing the ball more than they were running it. Obviously, Nick went down. That kind of tipped the hand. But the whole thing is you lost Deshaun. So when you were going with PJ Walker, when you were going with DTR, you weren't not going to be a team that threw the ball first with those types of guys. This was always the plan. They're going to get to do it now. Obviously, they invested. We'll figure out what the running game is going to be in 2024. I don't think you're going to see Nick Chubb till maybe midseason, probably is my guess. But it is all going to be on Deshaun. So why not put together skill players around him that gave you almost 4,000 yards of total receiving last year? It should make things easier for him. And the other thing for Deshaun is throw the ball. Don't run it.
Jeff's great. And for more on Jeff, check him out over at the Locked On Browns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, the whole 9 yards. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.